Hey, everybody, good evening, and thank you so much for joining us for the third Percussion Community webinar of the season. My name is Caleb Rothy, and I'm the Percussion Education Coordinator for WGI Sport of the Arts. And I am joined by special guest tonight, Travis Peterman from George Mason Indoor Drumline. Travis, thank you so much for joining us tonight.
Yes, thank you for having me.
So I am really excited to chat with you. We're here kind of approaching near the end of the season. And things are really ramping up. The ensembles are ramping up, the events are ramping up, and we're building momentum going into kind of the end of our regional calendar. Circuit championships are coming up, and WGI World Championships, of course, is just around the corner. And we were just chatting, this is kind of like now 3 years of anticipation building back up to getting into UD Arena and seeing all these amazing performances. So we'll use that to kind of like fire up the conversation and fuel what we're talking about tonight. So without further ado, Travis, let's get started. For those that are maybe not as familiar with you as I and some of the other people may be tonight, can you give us kind of a brief rundown of your bio and a little bit of your history in the activity?
Sure, absolutely. So I was born and raised in Newark, Delaware, and I've kind of operated out of here for pretty much my whole career in this. I came up through the just doing concert band and drum set, how most people start, and kind of quickly got into the marching thing in high school and really kind of left everything else behind percussively. I just fell in love with it for really whatever reason. I was a snare drummer. I really kind of got started outside of the high school thing with Imperial Dynasty as a drill team, and they 17 years later now are a PIW group in WGI, which is, it's awesome. It's like a totally different thing. So shout out to Devin Fletcher and all those guys over there. But I did the ID thing, University of Delaware marching band. I marched with the Reading Buccaneers, the Blue Stars, United Percussion, and then Rhythm X, and kind of aged out from there. So once I got into it, I couldn't stop with the marching percussion stuff. I loved it. And I started teaching pretty much right out of there. I had done some stuff with some local high schools while I was marching with the independent groups. And as soon as I aged out, I came back to ID when they were PIA in 2013. I did some designing and teaching there, just really kind of, by our bootstraps, like just figuring it out as we go. Like I was just saying to you before this call, like, if we would have been aware of these kinds of educational resources beforehand, it probably would have helped a ton.
Yeah.
What we were dealing with. But teaching there, I taught 3 years at Cadets 2 when that was a DCA core. I did all 3 years at Cadets Winter Percussion while that was a thing. That was kind of tangented from C2. And then in 2015, I started teaching at Carolina Crown, and 2017, I ended up at George Mason, and I'm still at both of those places today, kind of keeping going with that thing. So that's kind of how I got here.
That's awesome. And that kind of leads me into my next question, which is I want to hear a whole lot about George Mason Indoor tonight. And I'm wondering if we can maybe start there and you just give us a little bit of a rundown of what are some of your responsibilities with that program? I know you end up wearing more than one hat with the organization, but just if you can run down a little bit of how that's structured and what your responsibilities are there, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, absolutely. So we structure it a little differently, and I'm not, I can't say that I'm familiar with how every world-class group structures their organization. So I guess I shouldn't say it's differently, but it's different than what I had been familiar with, marching and what I was around in that. We have some kind of unique, complicated titles. I'm the program director, kind of leave it at that. I also write most of the battery book. I do some of the choreography, and I just am kind of involved on the staff coordination end of things. But there are also people involved in all of that. Like we have an operations director. We have some people in the office that work for the athletic bands ensembles, which is technically what we are at GMU, that are a huge help in moving things around. Obviously the rest of the design team as well, Paul Nalesnik, Dan Shack, working with the battery stuff as well. So it's kind of like I have my hand in a few areas, but it's not as maybe stereotypical as like, that's just the director, he does those certain things. And I know you want to talk a little bit more about the administration and the design later on, so I won't totally broach into that, but it's a little bit outside the box in a way that we're intending to capture everyone's strengths and kind of avoid not necessarily weaknesses, but just things that people don't want to do as much. How can we set it up to benefit each staff member? I would say.
Yeah, and we are definitely going to get into that tonight because I want to pick your brain on a couple of those things. But one of the things that you mentioned, I think, is a hallmark for most independent groups. And I know I've had a couple of independent instructors that have reached out and are like, I really like when you have somebody from an independent group on the webinar because it's just so different than Scholastic in terms of infrastructure and in terms of building a team and building a staff. And I couldn't agree more. Back in the day was part of the founding group of people for Pulse Percussion, and we started with very humble means and wanted to go large with everything. And you just realize very quickly how exhausting and time consuming trying to get an independent group, just off the ground and out onto the floor is, because you just don't have any of that infrastructure. And so what you end up doing is recruiting a whole bunch of people and saying, okay, everybody is going to wear 8 hats. And we're all going to try to pick one, the ones that are sized the best for what our strengths are. But everybody's got to do something because otherwise this isn't going to happen. So I think, you said, like, I'm not sure that we're set up the way that all independent groups are. And that's definitely true. But I think you're probably set up in a similar fashion in that every independent group that I know of, everybody's wearing multiple hats. There's not one way to do it. It's kind of an all hands on deck thing. And you try to bring as many people into the fold as you can to make sure that you're not burning yourselves out and, wearing anybody down to a nub too much.
Yep.
So I wanted to tap into one thing tonight. We had an event, WGICon back in 2019, and you and Dan Shack presented at that, I think what was probably one of my favorite sessions from the whole entire event. And the session that the two of you presented was entitled Between Organizational Logistics and Creative Freedom. And obviously I think it was like an hour-long session, maybe even a little bit longer than that. So we don't have time to recap all of that tonight, but I know there's a lot of people that are going to watch this video that were not able to be in attendance at that. And I just geeked out so much over your session. So I'm wondering if you can just kind of give us a brief synopsis of the thesis or kind of the main ideas from that session. Just a quick little recap.
Sure, absolutely. So I think when you boil it down, you can kind of fit everything in under either administration or design, like if you really want to separate things out. So it was just about how those things need to communicate. And like you said, it's every group is going to have a different setup and people with different strengths and et cetera. But those two kind of big areas need to talk to each other. They need to be fluid and they need to be set up to help each other. So I think the thesis is really, this was myself and Dan Shack who kind of act as kind of the tops of those two areas at GMU, Dan being the creative director and me being the program director. But it just helps that we both have, hands and feet in each other's sides as well. So it's not, all one and all the other. It's about all the ways that those things interconnect and that how they are designed for each other and that they don't exist in a vacuum, or you're gonna run into some trouble if you view it that way, I think.
I loved in that session that you really talked about giving both of those things equal weight. And I think when we look at the most successful programs, they do give equal weight to the logistical nuts and bolts of like, how does this work? And then the creative part, creative freedom, the creative process, the design process. And so, ensembles that have struggled, and I've been a part of a couple of them, have been perhaps too heavy in one area and too light in the other, or vice versa. And that always creates some challenges. So I think that's just the title alone is enough to get us to go, oh yeah, we got to give equal credence to both of these things.
Sure.
To make sure that the ladder is on solid footing, so to speak.
Exactly.
From that session, I know you had a lot of very practical, you kind of shared the behind the scenes process for George Mason and had some amazing diagrams that you shared as part of that. For those that weren't able to attend, are there any maybe 2 or 3 tips from that session that you might have for people listening to this webinar tonight?
Sure. Yeah. I think maybe one of the biggest ones is to keep the finger on the pulse of your membership in relation to both areas, how they're feeling about how the administration is going, the rehearsal times, the logistics, the to and the from, and making sure that they're being heard and they're kind of comfortable in what's going on there. And there are some instances where they need to be kind of shown what they should be comfortable with. You know what I'm saying? This isn't the easiest thing in the world. It's going to require some resilience at times, but just accounting for them in that. And then also in the design, like, is this part of the show? Is this element of the design? Is this something that they want to perform, that they're excited to show up on Friday night and to get into? And that's been more of a kind of a recent revelation for Dan and I, maybe like, 2019 or so. It's like, man, do percussionists really want to go out there and do a 1.5 minute long ballad where they're dancing? Some of them do, a lot of them don't. So just making those choices for your individual group and what your your membership base is interested in would be my first point. And then the second one, I think, is just, it's all for nothing if you don't communicate it and involve your team, staff, members, but just involving and making sure people feel like they're participating and that they're contributing to this entire engine, to this whole machine that is being created. It's never about one individual. I'm a huge sports fan. I know you're into football too, so you'll appreciate this. But I've always appreciated what Bill Belichick and the Patriots dynasty was, and all you would hear him say in the press conferences is like, on to the next thing, or do your job. You know what I mean? So like, if you lay the plans out well enough, you just have to be accountable for executing them, and just making sure everybody's kind of comfortable with what their role is in the team per se.
Yeah. And what I love about that philosophy is it's great because it gives everybody like, you have a job to do, just do this. But also you can't just say, just do your job until somebody has very clearly laid out what all the jobs are and have given, job descriptions and roles. And until there's clarity around that, you can't just tell everybody, okay, do your job. And the same thing is true for all of our ensembles. Until I've been clear about my expectations as a designer or as an instructor or something like that, it's hard for the performers to live up to those expectations. So yes, that's wonderful.
Yeah. And it's sometimes hard to, you have to follow up with that too. It's not a matter of just saying something once or laying a plan out at the beginning and expecting everybody to stay tuned into it. And I have to constantly remind myself too, like I tend to feel like I'm being repetitive. So I like to not maybe say those things as much as maybe I should. And then something falls through and I'm like, all right, man, I haven't checked in about this in a while. It's probably time to, to communicate this again. So just it needs to happen more than is comfortable sometimes, the communication.
That's wonderful. And I think those are great tips. I love the idea of you're starting with communicating with the members and not taking for granted or assuming too much. Oh, they'll probably really like doing this. Well,
Right.
rather than making that design choice, why not ask them? Why not, actually get the real information? Why not have those conversations? A lot of the time we fill in a lot of gaps and make a lot of assumptions, and we are more effective educators and more effective leaders of programs when we involve all the stakeholders and actually find out what that information is. So I love that advice. Hey, Travis, we just got a question from Dave. He was wondering if you and Dan would have set up your roles and plans differently. I think specifically about George Mason, if you were dealing with a high school aged PIA ensemble. So still independent, but maybe younger performers, less experienced, more, basic and beginning skills in the activity. What do you think? Would you have set up the roles and plans differently? Or do you think this is, would be the same flow through all paradigms?
Sure. That's a great question. And I'll start by saying, I think doing the world-class thing and the younger A-class, scholastic, et cetera thing, it has certainly some differences. And I'll be the first one to say that I don't view, the independent world thing as being above those. I think it's very different. And I honestly, I am intimidated by the scholastic and the PIA thing. I think it's harder, honestly. And I did do that 1 year at ID and A, and I never was involved with a WGI high school group. So honestly, that is a little out of my zone a little bit. Would I set the roles up differently? Probably not the roles, but again, there's going to be a ton of things you have to manage differently because you're not dealing with adults. It's probably a little bit less of getting their full-blown opinions, talking to section leaders that have been through, a couple years of this activity already is very different than, trying to get a ninth grader just to know what's going on in all the ways that they need to know. So, I think the role split could work, again, just depending on skill sets, but the implementation and carrying out the plan, I think, would be very different with different age students.
That's excellent advice and a good perspective to share as well. All right. My next question for you. So here's the thing. I first became aware of you and your work in the activity in your years with Cadets Winter Percussion. I remember seeing the first couple of those ensembles go, man, who is working with this group? Who is part of this design process? Because it was fresh, it was unique, it was different, it was very cool. And so that's the first time I kind of became aware of your work, and it followed your work from there. And then obviously with George Mason Indoor now. And I think you and the whole team, I know it's not, just you, but you, Dan, and the whole rest of the team are coming up with some amazingly creative and fresh and unique takes on the activity and interpretations of what we can do with the dimensions on the floor that we're given and the instruments that we're able to utilize in this activity. So I want to pick your brain a little bit on design. And I want to ask for George Mason specifically, when do you begin the design process, where do you normally start that?
Sure. So it has been fairly consistent, and to tie it into the CWP thing, it has been Dan Shack and myself and Andrew Montero for pretty much all of these indoor shows. Again, Dan being more on the overall design, choreography, and Andrew writes the pit and the soundscape stuff. It's those two are really both great at just ideas from thin air, ground up. So we've had a couple shows that have started with Dan thinking of a concept, and then we found music for it. Like the Fringe show was a concept based thing that he just really wanted to. He was interested in the idea of what happens right outside of the focus area of things, and he really wanted to do integrate the hip hop thing into that, because that is kind of an outside of the main focus of what is normally happening with music and our activity. But Andrew has certainly come up with shows as well by just bringing in some music, and then that inspires visual ideas, concept ideas, etc. So it's been those two for us, but I think whatever's the best idea, it's possible to structure the rest of a show around an idea that is strong enough. You kind of just need to take it through those paces and make sure, like, all right, is this a one-dimensional idea? Like, can I think of one cool moment that involves this, or are there maybe several? Can I think of a bunch of, again, musical, visual, conceptual, vertical moments that could be inserted here that could work? So just being fluid is the process, but those two guys are our big ground level design for sure.
I love that you talked about being fluid in the process. Clearly, the three of you have a great collaborative system where you're able to work together and bounce ideas and off of each other, and then complement each other with the way that you put together the programs. We have the visual aspects, the battery composition aspects, the front ensemble, sound design, all that kind of stuff. So I think that speaks really well. And I also like that you talked about, when you're coming up with ideas, you kind of have to stress test some of these things and go, is this a one-dimensional idea where it's a great idea with one killer effect, but is it a 6-minute program? Is there going to be an arc to this? We don't have to tell a story, but we got to have some sort of an arc that's going to have a beginning, middle, and end and feel fulfilling to people. And we've all seen those programs before where it starts out great and you go, man, what a great concept. It just doesn't have legs after that. Yeah. Exactly. And so I think that's great advice for anybody that's looking to put together a show is once you have that good initial kernel, you have to figure out what else happens with this. What's the range that's possible here? Can I storyboard multiple events, or am I hanging my hat on like one killer event in the show? That's usually tough to wrap a whole show and a whole program around.
Yes.
You mentioned this a little bit, but I want to pick your brain. You were talking about in the Fringe show, like it started with kind of a concept and then you built everything around it. Do you find that when the three of you are working together on design process, that it's usually that way, that it starts with kind of a concept or a high-minded idea, or does it start sometimes with music first? Somebody finds a piece of source material, we go, we really want to be in this vein or this genre or this style, or maybe a visual motif first, or does it change? Is it every year a little different in terms of how you initiate that process and how you start to fold in different elements?
Yeah, it is. It has been a little bit different every year. The one thing that hasn't kind of come up for us is a visual motif first. That's kind of the only thing that we haven't totally gone with yet. But yeah, like I said, Fringe was that. Deconstructed the CWP in 2015. That show was a concept first show as well, and we kind of picked music to to kind of go with that, like all right, deconstructed, what kind of music is easily deconstructed to where you can see layers. And we chose to go with just a traditional like Bach piece that you can pull all these lines out of and just kind of focus on, and it makes some sense. And it's also music. Those are the best, where you find an idea that's kind of in multiple, like it's conceptual and musical, or conceptual and visual, or etc. So like whatever concept is kind of just pumping out ideas. And we usually just kind of stop talking about anything else, and we just end up hyper focused on this, and then we know it's the one for that year.
Because it's almost, like a self-generating idea machine. Once you tap into it, you're like, we could do this, and this, and if we did this, then that ties into this piece. Yeah, I love that approach that you've taken to that. Yeah. All right, let's pivot a little bit and let's talk more holistically. I know you're a huge student in this activity. You geek out about this stuff as much as I do, and digest as much indoor percussion as I do. As somebody that watches a lot of performances, watch a lot of different ensembles and things like that, what's a design tip that you have that you could share with the whole community? Maybe just observational. As you're watching shows, you go, you know what? I think if we all thought about this, or here's something I cracked the code on that I wish more people knew about. Do you have any design tips that you could share with us tonight?
Sure. The first thing that comes to mind is something I talk about a lot in critique when I judge, is that the show sounds and looks very different live than it does in your virtual drumline file or in your Pieware file, etc. So, and I know everybody's kind of facility situation is different, and it's tough, and we don't all get the chance to view our show, in the proper environment. And I definitely, I identify with that as well. But just doing your best to kind of assess what it's going to be like live, and using every year to kind of realize what kinds of things work, what kinds of things don't work. I find this very helpful in music design as well. Just, it requires a lot less, I think, voices, layers, whatever you would call it, to kind of read in a gym through speakers with live performers than what you can get an audio file to sound like, especially in regards to like the transparency of lyrics and spoken word, stuff like that. And it's so tough to marry that reality to the design. So just being honest with yourself about how it's coming across, and, not going in and feeling like, oh, well, we designed it to read one way, but it's not, kind of, if that's happening, adjust and make sure it's able to be communicated in real life and not just on paper.
Travis, I think that is such great advice for everybody, whether you've been doing this for a really long time and just need it as a refresher, or you're kind of new to the activity, or new in a design role, or new in an education role. That just this concept of you design it one way with one intent, and those are just plans. That's a rough draft. That's a jumping off point. Yes. That's not exactly going to translate in that exact fashion to the floor and to the gym and to the arena in a live performance setting. So the word I think you used was just adjust, be ready to adjust. And I think that is such great advice. We've all been there before. I'll just speak for myself, where I had an idea. I was married to it. Like it stole my heart, and I just kept pushing all season. No, it's got to work. It's got to work. And like, you just get to a point where you go, it's not working the way that it was in my head. And I'm doing my performers a disservice by not adjusting and regrouping and maybe revisiting some things and going like, we got to pivot into a slightly different direction. Yep. I used to do that with orchestration all the time too. You have all these great ideas, you put it down, and then they start playing and you go, it's just saturation. Like, it's just too much here. Yes. And my composition will be improved by, grabbing that pencil, flipping it over, and reaching for the eraser, pulling a few things out. Yeah. So that is great advice. When I was teaching the activity, I think I was in a very similar vein to you, where I was responsible for a lot of the logistical stuff for my ensembles, and spent a lot of years toiling away at trying to get processes and logistics dialed in. So similar question for you. We talked a little bit on the design side. I'd love to wrap it up with a little bit of a logistical question. As you've talked with other people, as you've observed other groups at shows, trying to get through a warm-up protocol or in and out of the gym, or just organizing your program, are there any big logistical mistakes that you see others making that you've got maybe some advice for, or that there's something that you would counsel everybody to maybe approach slightly differently?
Sure. So not something that I've personally witnessed. But I would say anything that is kind of causing stress, like if there's a stress area that's happening, if moving around, you can tell that just the anxiety is present. There's probably something that hasn't been explained well enough or practiced enough, and just doing literal practice reps, like before the show, talk about the flow, send the maps out, make sure everybody knows what side of the school to go to, et cetera, and just planning through it and spending rehearsal time, working on the on and off, et cetera. That took a few years to integrate and to have the foresight to, like, all right, I know we're behind and we want to rehearse and we want to get these reps, but also if we don't get them comfortable with going on and off the floor, all this technical information doesn't matter. They're going to be uncomfortable and it's going to go out the window. So
right.
Practicing it. Yeah.
I think that's such good advice. We've heard a lot of other people say the same thing, that you've got to rehearse that with the same intensity that you rehearse, section E to F in the show. E to F is not going to be as good as it was during rehearsal if everybody is flustered at the, at the downbeat of the performance. So I think that's great advice. The only other thing I would add on that, and I think it's specific to this time of the year, is now that we're getting to the end of the season, everybody's got their full length show out on the floor. Everybody's finally got all the props in. And one thing you see a lot of ensembles struggle with at this point in the season is getting in and out smoothly and across that timing line ahead of the interval time, like the hammer dropping on that. So that's one of the other things that I think, requires a little bit of concentration at this point in the season, is when everybody's got those incomplete shows, we have a lot of time to set up and pre-stage, because the group right before you did not take their entire interval. Now that everybody's potentially using up that whole interval, we got to be efficient at getting in, getting things deployed, coming across that timing line, doing the gig, and then efficiently getting everything A, across the timing line so our time can stop, and then B, out of the building or out of the arena so the next group can come fully across. So another good thing to concentrate on at this point of the season, certainly.
100%.
All right, Travis, I would like to pivot a little bit, and I would like to now talk about education. I'd like to get inside rehearsals. I'd love to hear a little bit about your process and things like that. But I want to start this off by asking you a question related to your educational background. Now, I know that you've got your bachelor's degree in behavioral science. I know you also have a master's degree in school counseling. And so as I was prepping for this, I was wondering, gosh, I wonder how you use some of your educational background, or maybe how some of that background influences what kind of an educator you are and how you interact with your students, given your academic history and field of study in those ways. Would you mind speaking to that a bit?
Yeah, absolutely. It definitely is applicable. And I joke all the time, because when people find out that that's my educational background, they're really confused. They're like, well, why do you do band full time? Why don't you work in those fields? And, I don't know. I kind of always knew, like, a little bit into the school counseling post-secondary thing. Like I kind of knew I didn't really want to do it, but I was enjoying the concepts and the information. And I've always kind of been interested in behavior and the brain and communication. And there was just so much to go into that there. And I think that's super applicable in this gig, because I'm talking to people all the time, whether it's staff or whether it's members. And my goal with that is just to always try to communicate as if I'm the person that I'm talking to, or I'm the person that needs to receive the information. And, how are they going to hear this best? Not necessarily how is it most comfortable for me to say, if that makes sense. So just, and it doesn't always work perfectly. Everyone's different. Everyone has different needs, and just trying to do my best to be aware and to kind of learn what the people in my groups year to year, need most and respond best to from a communication standpoint. But I do think that education has helped me just kind of decipher it, and, to be aware enough that I'm never going to know everything that's going on. And there's always going to be more to learn. That's another thing that I think it's kind of helped me with, is just the concept that, you're never going to arrive. You're never going to be done learning about this. You've never arrived at a process that is going to work forever. You're always, like, year to year, we take a couple weeks off after finals, and then me and Dan are talking, all right, we need to change this. We need to evolve this. We need to change this process because of something, that didn't go quite right the year before. And just always trying to just know that that side of it exists, and this all isn't on paper, kind of like what we were talking about with the design. Like, it doesn't matter what you write down, what your logistics plan is on paper, if you can't execute it and communicate with people thoroughly enough to get them behind it and to understand it.
I love that you said that. I almost wish everybody could right now, like, go back and listen to that again, where you just talk about, there were two things in there. The one that really struck me was, we're always kind of like a work in progress. We will never arrive. We're never done with any of this stuff. And so that's true for our ensembles. It's true for us as people, as educators, as leaders, as designers or creators, artists, what have you. We're never done. I think that speaks to, the concept of being a lifelong learner and constantly being in pursuit of perfection, even knowing that we'll never really be able to get there. And then I just appreciated your take on, the humility aspect of talking to your students as if you're talking to yourself, treating them as, not people that are there to like execute the clean triplet role, but as a person that has,
yes,
anxiety, but also passion and enthusiasm for this, and trepidation, and like all of these mixed emotions that go into this, and balancing all these other things in life at the same time. I think that's such an important thing that I wish we all understood better about the art of being an educator. Yeah, we all probably have to have been great players at some point and have that knowledge about playing the instruments or rehearsing the ensemble. But man, there's a lot of like human psychology that comes into leading an ensemble and leading a group of people and convincing them to like work with you to refine a program and get down the road and perform phenomenally well. So I'm so glad that you said that. And I think you have so much to offer the activity and all of us at large with your perspective on that. And hopefully this was, at least a couple of things that people kind of take with them and think about as they go into their next rehearsal, or as they go into planning for next year or recruiting for next year's ensemble and things of that nature. Awesome. Hey, speaking of recruitment, you are an independent ensemble director, so you don't have a class of incoming 8th grade students that you can just say, hey, you're now in the drum line. I was wondering if I might be able to pick your brain on what your approach is to recruitment for George Mason. And I also kind of want to pivot that with, we're still in the coming out of the pandemic season. And certainly COVID is not necessarily over at this point and has impacted everything about the course of the season. So did your approaches have had to change at all? Did you have to make any alterations due to the presence of COVID this season?
Sure. So I wouldn't say that we necessarily altered anything because of COVID. Our numbers were slightly down, and that's in line with the other two world groups that are in our area too. We all saw slightly less quantity. For us, at least, the quality was if anything improved and like in line with the kind of trajectory that the group's been on, fortunately. But my philosophy in general has always been another sports reference. If you build it, they will come, from Field of Dreams. So just trying to do our best to make this a group that performers and staff like want to be a part of, that they have fun doing it, that they feel like it's fulfilling. So I feel like a lot of our recruitment happens actually during the season with the product that we put out. And that was a big topic of conversation with the 2021 virtual year. With the music video we put out for that, our thought was like, all right, what are people going to notice? What are they're going to think, oh, that's cool, I would like to be a part of that, as opposed to just like a PowerPoint presentation with some, something you could do any other time. We were looking for what can we do new in this arena under these circumstances. And it's absolutely tied to recruiting, because the prospective members see that. But just trying to make the group as solid as possible and making it a desirable location to go.
And I know many other ensemble directors have talked about that. I know Mike Jackson talks about that all the time. Like, my show, like whatever program I'm putting out this year, is my like ad campaign for come join my ensemble next year. Yes. So every time we plan a show, we're trying to be competitively successful, but we're also trying to attract the kind of people that are going to be the next generation membership of this. So it sounds like you've got a very similar approach to that. And I think that's kind of true for anybody that's doing the independent thing. Your program has to be the calling card for it. I also love that you talked about making it a fun experience, making being a part of that program something that's fun. And I think that might be a good reminder for all of us, especially at this point in the season. It starts to feel like, the dog days of the season a little bit, where we're not learning a new show. We're just trying to perfect what we've got out there, and we're really pushing. And some things, weren't working early on. They're still not working now. And it's very easy to start to get frustrated with those things, whether you're a performer or whether you're an instructor. So it's a good reminder, like sometimes what our ensemble needs is to just take a breath and find a way to continue to make this fun and get people to bring back that sense of fun and lightness and enthusiasm as we try to continue to refine the presentations.
Absolutely.
So that kind of pivots into the next question that I had for you, which is just, how has the season been going so far for your ensemble? I know you already spoke to it, but I loved what the program put out in terms of the virtual video last year. This is obviously a very different experience with coming back to in-person events and things like that. How has it gone for your ensemble?
Yeah, overall, really strongly. Again, I feel like it's in line with the trajectory that we've been on as a group, which has been to get better every year in a lot of ways. So in some ways, it's definitely been harder, at least in our area. It's been tougher to get facilities.
Yeah.
We don't always have space on GMU's campus. So we had been actually kind of pretty much primarily operating outside of that in 2019, which is where we really started to get our footing, being able to be somewhere consistent. So I think still the toughest thing has been to find facilities. We've kind of had to go weekend to weekend, and we've had to really alter our rehearsal schedule a few times to kind of account for, we have a gym from this very specific time. So we need to plan to everything we need to do in a gym. We need to fit in here. And then we need to fill in all this other space with stuff we can work on that's, not in a gym. So it's been a little bit hard to get a consistent weekend to weekend thing. But again, it's helped us to build resilience as a group, and we prepared them for this right away. The second audition camp, we knew this was going to be the reality. There weren't, any false promises or extra hopeful speeches given, like, this is not going to be a problem in 2 weeks. Like, no, we like to be, Dan and I are very transparent with the members. And that's also something that might be a little different in a scholastic group, but these are all adults for us. And we want to make sure that they're capable of understanding these concepts. So we want to make sure we're letting them in on that and not trying to pretend that it's something else, because they're going to know. And then you start to lose kind of credibility and you lose the buy-in that you need to kind of get down the road. But outside of the facilities, this has been a great year for us. So I can just hope that COVID and the liability stuff that this has brought down on a lot of the public schools will ease at some point. I don't know if that's going to happen, but
well, I think we're all hoping, but we just don't know yet. As we've all been saying for 2 years with the shape of the pandemic, we know what it is right now. We don't know exactly what it's going to be 2 weeks from now, 2 months from now, 2 years from now, but things have been trending in the right direction. So that's positive. I love that you talked about being transparent with the performers in the ensemble and just, like open book. Here's what it is. Here's what I know. Here's what I don't know. Here's what we're anticipating will happen. How have they done with kind of those disruptions to the rehearsal calendar or things like, hey, we only have the gym from this time to this time, so we got to make some modifications? Have they been able to roll with that pretty well, or has that caused some unique challenges for them as well?
Yeah, I think, they've rolled with it well. I would say, again, overall, binary system, it's a 1 for sure. They've conquered it. Every week has been kind of a different thing. And there hasn't been a weekend where we leave feeling completely defeated. And, kudos to them, the membership and the staff, for everything they're doing to just kind of fight through that stuff. But I feel like we've been able to make progress consistently. Maybe not always the way that we would draw it up in a perfect world, but
Sure.
that's the reality that we're in. It's not a perfect world. And we just need to kind of make do with what we have and try to be great despite of that. And if anything, that just is going to make it sweeter at the end. And I feel like they're buying into that. I think we're in a good place with it.
That's great to hear. All right, let's pivot now and let's kind of get inside the rehearsal a little bit. Take us to George Mason rehearsals. Take us to what's going through your head and the rest of the staff's head right now. What are the kinds of things that you're working on? I know that you have a huge regional this weekend that the group is going to be going to. I know ensembles all across the country either probably have a very large WGI regional they're going to this weekend, or a large circuit show as we get here towards the end of the regular season. And we've got things like circuit championships coming up. What are the things that you are focusing on with your ensemble at this point in the season?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, like you said before, it's kind of the dog days or the doldrums of the season where so much progress has been made. It's easy to feel like there's not anything else to do. Like, how many times can you give the same technical comment, or how many times can you rep E to F? So just trying to find ways to refresh and to reset a little bit in ways. I think this is a great time of year to really focus in on what the performance aspect is. I've been talking a lot about individuals integrating like their specific performance qualities into each rep, like the same way they're, for a certain phrase, they're thinking, all right, mezzo piano, I really need to think about this dynamic, and my feet get a little bit slow here. And this is how I perform this phrase every single time. So it's more of a technical element, not to dry out the natural performance and all those things you want. But I find that, it's easy to get to Dayton at the end and to have that experience be completely overwhelming for new performers if you didn't prepare them for it before, and they're all of a sudden trying to harness all this energy, and it just comes out in ticks, and it doesn't sound great, and there's funky tempo things going on. So you really are spending the whole season trying to prepare them for these runs in Dayton, in front of the big crowd and on the big stage, where it's going to feel a little different than any other time, but just trying to, and we've been talking about this at the end of every weekend for weeks now at this point, and just trying to get it in their heads that this is what to expect. This is how to prepare for it. I've been trying to positively reinforce the members that are kind of posting extra videos during the week. Like, hey, look what I've been working on. Like, hey, so-and-so is setting themselves up to have great runs in Dayton and to not have any regrets about kind of, the time they put in to this activity, while also acknowledging that, there's other stuff going on. No one is out there doing GMU exclusively. They're all going home, and, most of them are in school or working or both. And there's just, other responsibilities to juggle here. So trying not to make it seem like we want to dominate their time, but also imposing that this is, again, this is from the beginning of the season. Like, this is a really serious group. We take it seriously. We work really hard. If you're interested in that, this is the place for you. So just trying to be transparent from the beginning about what the expectations are and why they should buy into that, and what the payoff is going to be at the end, which is, I think the ultimate payoff, I know this isn't really the question, but the ultimate payoff would just be having a great run at the end and just feeling like there wasn't any more you could have done to prepare yourself for it, both as a group and individually as a performer.
I love what you mentioned there at the end about fulfillment comes from feeling like there wasn't anything left for me to do. I put everything I had into this. I was as prepared as I possibly could be. And I basically, I had that last performance with no regrets. There wasn't a single time where I was like, really should have worked a little bit harder in week 3. I really should have spent more time dialing this in. So I think that's such great advice, and something, look, it doesn't matter what level you're participating in, whether it's an A Open or World, whether it's marching or concert, whether it's scholastic or independent, whether you're going to WGI World Championships this year, or you're ending with a circuit championship or something like that. That's great advice for all performers out there, and for all of us as educators to talk to our students about. Look, let's do each one of these rehearsals with the intent that we'll have no regrets left at the end of the season, that we'll never wish that we had just one more rep to try to get it right.
Exactly.
I think that's awesome. You mentioned talking to your students and your performers about getting that mindset of a world championships performance right now, which is something that I always started to talk about. I don't know if I did it as early as you are right now, but I certainly did towards the end of the season, where we started to talk about put yourself there, put yourself in the arena on the floor. What's your heart rate right now? What's your body feeling right now? That's the kind of rep we want to have right now, not just another rep of this. You want to have a performance rep, and you want to get yourself into that space. I think that's probably easy to do, relatively easy to do for those that have done it before, those that have been to world championships. They've been on that floor. They've had that performance under the lights with all the eyes on them. But we have so many people in our activity that have not had that experience before. Or if they have, it's now been I mean, we were talking about it before the webinar went live tonight. It's been almost 3 years since we were last in UD Arena together.
Yeah.
What's your approach to that with the ensemble this year, either for the new members of GMU that haven't done the performance at that level on that kind of stage before, or those that have maybe done it, but it's been a long time since they were back in that space? How are you approaching that this season?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why we've started digging into this maybe a little earlier than usual, is because there are so many people that have never been to Dayton. You know, we had a bunch of people perform with us at our first show, and that was the first time they had ever technically been around an independent world performance of any kind, and they were in it. So you're right. There's a lack of kind of context as to like what we're attempting to achieve here. So we sent them some videos of like some favorite, I think it was like Mystique 2010, Rhythm X 2013, some RCC, some Pulse, like just some of the, the legendary shows and the activity, and tried to get them to view it from the performer perspective. Like, hey, look at how they're emoting, look at what they're doing with their body and with their face. And it feels kind of ridiculous, but this is actually what it takes to kind of emote hundreds of feet away into the big audience like that. So just trying to show them that. And I think if we would have had some more time in the middle of the season, like not running around with the facility stuff, I would have loved to sit down and have like a little like movie session and like stop, pause, like, all right, hey, this is something to take away from this moment and how this happened, et cetera. So I think just using the history of what has been successful in the activity before, and just those like legacy performances to use as examples of what we're trying to achieve is helpful.
Yeah, I love that idea. I used to, when I was teaching, we would do movie nights once a season as well, where we just go, hey, we're going to put on a video and watch some of my favorite shows in the history of the activity. A, because I want you to know about all the great shows that have happened before, and I want you to see hallmarks of what the activity's been. But B, there's no better example of like authentic performance than watching those people in those moments where they're performing for a world championship or trying to earn a medal or trying to make finals or something like that.
Yeah.
And so it's such a great opportunity. And I love your strategy this season of just sending some videos out to performers and saying, watch this. What are your takeaways? Can you capture this for yourself, your version of this in rehearsal right now, rather than a month from now? That's great. And again, that's another thing all of our ensembles could be doing right now, or all things we could be doing with our students and encouraging them to think about.
Absolutely.
What else in rehearsal right now? What else are you focusing on? What other kinds of information are you giving to your students beyond emoting and connecting with the audience and trying to put themselves in the performance space? What other kinds of pieces of information do you find yourself giving at this point of the season?
Sure. So we're at a point, and 2020 was the first year we were able to finish our show before the first performance, which was a huge goal of ours. And we didn't get to see that season through, unfortunately, obviously. So I don't know where that would have ended up, but it feels like we're on that similar trajectory now where we got it done. We performed the whole thing at the first show. Just got to read on all of it. So we're still at the stage where we're making some tweaks, mostly little additions, little subtractions. I think all our major edits are done. So we're really just trying to find ways to get consistent, to make sure every little movement in the show is defined. It's crazy how far you go in and you end up breaking something down, in late March or April. And you're like, wait, that hasn't been defined before, that count. What are we doing on this count? They're like, I don't know. So just trying to scope out those zones of the show that are in the most need and kind of focusing on them, and just, it's kind of like whack-a-mole, like whatever pops out as a problem, like, all right, we need to shift our focus and work on that and just kind of maintain it and keep building the, I would say it's not too late to still be talking about technique and quality and how that is going to clean through just, having a more solid approach to certain things. And, obviously now is the time as well to be honest with yourself about what is working and what's not. If the same passage has been dirty this whole time and they're 1 for 10, that's probably not as high of a percentage as you're going to want. And it's probably time to make that easier, I would say. So just facing those unfortunate realities. And it's always like, there's one of us on the design team that it's brought up that like something's not working. And it's like, man, that's my favorite part. Like,
I know.
Change it, but
like, and I want it, right. I want it to work so badly. Yeah. We're 1 for 10 on this right now.
It's that time. Yeah.
Well, and That's such great advice because we're going to regret it in 2 weeks from now when we haven't made that edit or that change and are feeling crunch time. But right now, it's certainly not too late to go, okay, is this working? Do we really need this? Is this a bigger liability than it is an asset in the program right now? If so, we got to make some modifications to it. And I also like what you said about, technically, we can still dive in on technique and
Yeah.
the technical aspects that are going to give us good quality of sound, that are going to allow us to be fundamentally solid visually, things of that nature, especially considering so many of our performers have not done this live in front of people in
Yep.
the way that those of us that have been around for a while are used to. We're just on this cycle every year, every year, every year. We probably have to dig in on the technical aspects a little bit more this season than maybe we're used to at this point in the season, because
Yes.
performers just need that information. Students need that information as well.
Yep.
That's fantastic. Hey, so let's go ahead and start kind of wrapping this up. And again, anybody that is with us live tonight, you're welcome to pose a question. If there's something on your mind, you can drop it into the Q&A, and Travis and I will kind of we'll try to take it before we get out of here. I want to talk to you now about World Championships. We've teased this a couple of times, but I am over the moon excited about getting back out there to Dayton, Ohio, and getting us all together. I think you probably feel the same way about it as I do. What are you most looking forward to at World Championships this year?
Man, it's going to feel so good to just see everything back and just view it from afar and just watch everything happen, watch the instructors and the performers and the designers that have never done their thing in Dayton for real before, because there's going to be more of them than usual this year because of everything that's going on. And I think just that experience and the camaraderie and just how this community kind of, how great it is when we get together at the end. Like, it's literally my favorite pageantry event. My social battery runs out really quickly in large groups, but I'm still looking forward to seeing everyone and, Irish goodbying as quickly as possible. But it'll be great to just see everybody from all over and just be back into it. And hopefully everybody gets out there, safely and successfully, no penalties, etc.
Yeah, clean penalty sheet is definitely the goal for it. And I same thing. I'm just excited to be back to this and be able to have everybody together for Percussion World Championships. I've said it before, it is my favorite week of the year by far. And I'm so excited that we've got that, really just around the corner. Like the days are ticking down now to it.
Yeah, don't remind me.
All right. So, Travis, we've talked a lot about process. We've talked a lot about your experiences over the years and how you've grown and your approach to things and design and all that kind of stuff. I'm wondering if you might have one piece of advice that you might give to an aspiring designer that's watching the call tonight, or maybe a young arranger or a young instructor that's getting started teaching, maybe something that you've kind of picked up through your years of doing this activity that you wouldn't mind sharing with somebody that might be in that position tonight.
Yeah. So something that was big for me was just finding the balance of just the trusting your own vision and your own process with also being a student of the activity and watching what's going on and understanding, not just watching what's successful because it's successful and it's placing well, but really understanding why it's placing well, what is going into the success in that design or the success in that ensemble and administratively or whatever. So just finding that balance between finding your own path, if that's your goal to really, set new standards and make a trail, and also just being aware of what the other great people have kind of set forth before us as things that, I guess you could look to change them for if you want to, but there's also a bunch of things that work for a reason and that are good to kind of know about and just be incorporated in what you're doing.
You alluded to my favorite question in the activity, which is not asking necessarily, what is successful, which groups are successful, but always trying to ask why. Why was that successful? Why was that effective? Or why did that group place first? Why did that group place 27th? And so just trying to get in and really analyze things rather than taking it for granted. Oh, shows about blank seem to do well. That's not always necessarily the truth. You got to go a little bit deeper than that to really analyze what is making something successful and why that is.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Travis, this has been awesome. There are so many pieces of information that you've shared tonight that have been fantastic and great nuggets that people hopefully can take forth and apply in their own ensembles. I have heard so many great things about George Mason Indoor this season, and I have not been, I've purposely stayed away from trying to find any videos online or anything like that. And I cannot wait to see in person in Dayton what the ensemble looks like. And really for all of the ensembles that are out there, getting a chance to see everybody together again in Dayton, Ohio at World Championships is going to be absolutely amazing. We've got a ton of people that are coming in to do that this year. And I know that there are also some groups that would love to be there that aren't going to be able to be at World Championships this year. So if that's you and your ensemble, we're hoping you'll be able to join us in 2023 or 2024, whenever your plans allow for that. And hopefully you can still be a part of the fun and the action by jumping on Flow Marching and checking out what's happening there, or following the ins and outs on social media or something like that. And really participating in it, because I know we're just a couple of weeks away. I'm excited. Travis, I think you're excited.
Yes.
And it should be an amazing experience. All right, Travis, I want to thank you again for joining us tonight. This has been great, full of so much wonderful information. And I want to thank everybody else that's either joined us live tonight or is watching the video after the fact. It has been so awesome being able to get back to indoor percussion this season, back to the in-person events. Getting a chance for us to showcase all the great designs that everybody's been working on and all the amazing performances that the students are bringing to life in the activity this year. So thank you so much for doing that and being a part of this. Travis, thank you for being a part of this. And yeah, absolutely. And we'll see everybody at a show real soon.